Okay, first things first, let me address the elephant in the room. I did get a haircut, which you still really can't even tell because it's still too long. The ends don't show in the frame, but it is much shorter than it was. I literally just got it cut a few hours ago, and this is probably the nicest it will ever look because I'm not great at styling my hair, and I can't be bothered to even straighten my hair, but yeah, I just feel so light. I'm really feeling myself. If I'm touching my hair too much today, I'm sorry, but you know, I'm still getting used to it. But anyways, yes, if you notice a difference, that is the main difference. Also, when I got home, I kept seeing these little tiny pieces of hair. I guess she cut so many layers and the hair was flying all over the place. I think I got them all, but if you see a little mark on my face, that's what that is. Hi friends, and welcome to Faerireads, where we talk about things that make the mundane more magical, namely books. So today we're going to talk about the books that I read in the latter half of the month of January 2021. So this month we've got the love between a mom and her baby and the lengths that she will go to for the love of her child. We've got murder, so the lengths that someone would go to for the love of another person. We've got Nazis. We've got warrior lovers. We're all over the place this month. But if that sounds interesting to you, just keep watching. So the first book I finished was an audiobook called Maid by Stephanie Land. So this is a memoir by Stephanie about her life and her experience raising a child as a single mother while being a cleaning lady. And so she really starts her story about how she became pregnant in the first place, and she was really in a toxic relationship but ended up becoming pregnant, and she's the type of person who does not judge women who terminate their pregnancies, but when forced with the decision herself, she was reminded of her own estranged relationship with her mother, and she really doesn't have the best family life. Her parents are not the most supportive, especially her mother. Her mother kind of alienated her and moved away. Like her mother, at least in the period of her life where this is all taking place, actually lives in the UK with her new husband. So she just literally up and left and started a new life. And so Stephanie, feeling very abandoned by her own mother, didn't want to do the same thing to her own child. So she chooses to continue on with the pregnancy and carry the child to term, despite being in an unstable relationship with the baby's father. And they try to make it work for a long time, but it's just such a toxic relationship. She can't get out, or for the safety of her and her child, they really need to get out. So it's the story of her on her own, trying to raise her child and dealing with all the struggles that brings, especially as someone who was uneducated and is living on a maid salary. So it's really a story about what it's like to be working poor in the United States, and it's just really heartfelt, and she's just a beautiful writer. And of course, the story is all told from her perspective, so it's her side of the story, I guess, but the way she tells the story, you're just really rooting for her, and it's just so compelling. I was just so drawn to her as a character, even though it is real life, but I was just so invested in her story and what was going to happen next to her. I felt like everyone else that she mentions in the book is like fully developed and very lifelike. So even though she is describing real world things, it's not dry at all. She very much is a storyteller, and she knows how to put the events of her life in a compelling way. But it was very eye-opening, and it touched really close to home for me because my mother worked as a cleaning lady or a janitor for most of my life. And so I know sort of what that is like and just the stigmas associated to it. And just part of having that experience growing me up has made me really appreciate all forms of labor. And I really do believe that every kind of worker deserves respect. And just, but reading this book was very valuable to me, knowing the behind the scenes of what it takes to survive in that situation. She describes all the programs she had to go through, all the hoops she had to jump through, and that's still not being enough. And it's just such a case for the need for social programs and, you know, just community safety nets and the need for compassion that we have for each other. But it's also very much a testament of the power of love and human willpower, just the way that she's determined to build a better life for herself and for her daughter. She does end up going back to school. I can't remember if she'd already had prior education or what, but she does go to school and she has a dream of becoming a writer. And, you know, it's the process of how she did that and was able to do that through working hard labor, minimum wage jobs in different cleaning services. So, and also it gets into, this is something that, it was just so good. It's very heartfelt, compelling, entertaining story, but just also very informative. And for that reason, I gave it 4 stars. The next book I finished was The Guest List by Lucy Foley. This is my first Lucy Foley book, which I gather she's a very popular author. I was on the wait list for this book at my library. I think I was on it multiple times, actually, just the way, you know, I'm juggling different loans, but very popular book, honestly. I had to wait a while to get my hands on my copy, but it is a thriller. It is a murder mystery thriller set on a very small island off of the coast of Ireland where a very exclusive wedding is taking place. So the wedding is between Jules, who is this sort of socialite, you know, HBIC girl boss character who also runs I can't remember if it's a blog or a fashion brand. No, I think it's a magazine. And her television star fiance, who is sort of like a Bear Grylls character. He's like, he has a reality show where he goes out in the wilderness and tries to survive. And so he's very famous and she's famous in her sphere, in her career, very successful. And so they have this very private but exclusive and luxurious wedding planned at this very remote this remote island. But we follow the story of their wedding through various perspectives. And the very first scene, it takes place in the middle of the night of the wedding. And the power is cut off, people are screaming, and apparently a body is found. So the rest of the book is exploring the mystery of the body, if it was really a murder, if someone really is dead, if it was just all, you know, people getting dramatic in the moment at night. So the suspects at play are the couple, like I mentioned. There's Aoife, which is the wedding planner, and it's actually her island that the wedding is at. So she and her husband, I forgot the husband's name, but they are also there in running the events behind the scenes. We also have the best man for the husband, who I'm forgetting his name too. The best man is actually a childhood friend of the groom, because they all went to this boarding school, this private boarding school, supposedly very elite. I don't know if it was based on a real school. I'm imagining something kind of like Eton or Eton. I'm American, obviously. I don't know how to pronounce it, but very like exclusive boarding school. So they're long childhood friends, and you also find out that he was the more outdoorsy person of their friend, and it's more his influence on the groom that got him to having this position in TV. And then we also have the other best man, who is actually the bride's best friend from childhood, which they have a history, a romantic history, and they still get kind of flirty with her, or with each other. But he is also married, the best friend. I think his name is Charlie. I'm sorry, I'm being so bad with names, but I'm pretty sure his name's Charlie. But Charlie's wife is also with him, which is Hannah. I love Hannah. Hannah's probably my favorite character. But she's just like a normal mom. Can't remember if she's stay-at-home mom or not, but she's just like very suburban lifestyle. They have a very middle-class lifestyle because Charlie is a teacher. Or Hannah especially feels the stress of being in such a formal and higher class environment, and is feeling a lot of judgment of being, you know, introduced into so many unfamiliar people. We've also got the bride's sister, who has a troubled past. We're led to believe that she is mentally ill, and she's had a few troubling episodes in the past. So we're throwing all of these characters together and trying to figure out who is dead and who did it. And it's just a lot of fun. I really liked it. The characters, a lot of them are terrible people I would never want to hang out with, but just reading their perspective was so interesting. The way that Foley writes is so intriguing. And I say that sort of in comparison to the last thriller that I read, which was The Wife Upstairs. If you saw my previous video, I'll link it if not. And that thriller, none of the characters were really likable, and I really didn't care what happened to them. But in this one, even though I hated them, or I hated some of them I did enjoy, like Hannah, like I mentioned. Even the ones that I couldn't stand, I was really intrigued by their perspective on things. It was just a lot of fun. The twist didn't really surprise me. I kind of saw it coming. I kind of figured it out before it was all revealed. But the writing was so good that it didn't detract too much from my enjoyment of the story. So since it was so much fun, I loved the moody setting and the sort of folklore elements that are woven in. There's a lot of superstitions about this island, and it all just created this perfect little mystery atmosphere, and it was just so much fun. So I gave it 4 stars. So the next book I read was much less fun, but still a valuable read, I think. This was something I listened to on audio, and it's Proud Boys and the White Ethnostate. I also forgot to write down the author for this, so I will edit it in. But it is nonfiction about the alt-right in America and their recent, I don't want to call it rise to power, but, you know, gaining in momentum. Is that a fair way to describe it? It's basically an examination of the alt-right in the United States primarily. They go into how sort of the origins of the alt-right and how it did exist before Trump, and it's been around for a long time, but it really focuses on how it gained momentum during the Trump years. And this was something I really wanted to learn about. It's been on my list for a while, but I was really inspired to bump this up in the priority list because of the events of January 6th. I'm not saying I was totally surprised. I did kind of see it coming because I have been following, I listened to a podcast called QAnon Anonymous. So if you want to know more about that side of the internet and what those circles are doing, I do recommend that podcast as a way to just keep tabs and keep informed about things that are going on without having to support those voices on the internet by watching their videos or whatever. I do really like that. And it's also really funny. It is very informative, and they have a very, you know, I do think they have journalistic integrity when they're examining the issues, but they are also really funny. I think one of them at least is a professional comedian. Maybe not, but they are really funny too. So that's just a coping mechanism thing to kind of, you know, deal with the harsh reality of the situation. I think that event was a wake-up call for a lot of people who had no idea that these things were going on. But even for people like me and like people listening to those podcasts and things kind of saw the warning signs, it was just a realization of how much power these ideas have been given recently. So that really made me want to understand more about these ideologies. So it was a really informative book. I can't say, you know, I loved it. I loved listening to it. Like, the main thing I kept saying to myself over and over was just yuck. Like, yuck. All of, like, so the quotes that she would read, like, describing what these people believe, it's just so disgusting. But I really didn't come to this, like, looking to be shocked and just get offended and get puffed up about it. I really wanted to know more about what their goals were, and I learned more about the Ethnostate, which was a word I'd heard before, but I didn't really know exactly what that looked like and what the plans were. And I do think it depends on the group, and it kind of may depend on who you ask and what their specific priorities are. But one thing that was mentioned was that they want to put all blacks in the South, or find a region in the South and move all blacks to. So it's not necessarily an idea of genocide and getting rid of racial groups, but forcing them to live in, like, forcing everybody to live in separate territories, which I was wild. Like, so I was shocked because, you know, typically in the political spectrum, you think about the right as, like, very much concerned with personal liberties and individual liberties above all else. But then they're like, what about the, I mean, first of all, it is awful denying the humanity of specific races and telling them they have to live in a specific spot. Obviously, that's awful. Human rights violation, totally disgusting. But what about the white people that are living in that place? Like, you're gonna tell them they have to move somewhere else? Like, where? It just does not compute. But anyway, you can't logic, you know? Anyway, I did learn a lot. Not necessarily things I wanted to learn, but I'm glad that I learned. I was also surprised to learn about how many women are involved in this movement, even though it is very heavily misogynistic. And some of the women that are mentioned have been, like, attacked because they're a woman and they're gaining power and popularity, and yet they still continue to push these ideologies. But anyway, it was a very useful read, and I do recommend it for anyone else who may be kind of naive to these issues, or just ignorant, or just curious to learn more like I was. So because I learned a lot, I gave it 4 stars. The last book I finished was A Heart of Blood and Ashes by Milla Vane. This is a fantasy romance novel. I started to say historical romance, but it's not in the real world. It's in a fantasy world set in what I gather is somewhat prehistoric times, because it's a world that is very tribalistic. There's very set apart tribes, but there's also kingdoms, societies that are a little bit more advanced and civilized, but there's also a lot of more barbaric, nomadic tribes. And this world is also filled with, like, raptor-like creatures, mammoths, like, you know, Ice Age kind of creatures that we picture in our world, but also fantastical, because it is a fantasy world where magic exists. There are things like rays, reanimated dead, and sorcerers, and things like that. But our story centers around Maddock. I'm calling him Maddock. I go between Maddock and Madek. And again, with a fantasy book, I don't know if there was a name guide with pronunciation. If there was, I didn't read it. So I'm just going with what my heart says. So I call him Maddock. Or I'm calling him Maddock. I've decided now. He is a sort of warrior. Well, he is a warrior, sort of the leader of his community, because he is the son of their leaders. I don't think they call them kings, but the king and queen of his tribe, basically. What they call it a Ran, I think, is their official title. But he discovers that his parents have been murdered, and upon investigating what happened to him, or what happened to them, he finds out that they were lured to a rival kingdom where they were accused of treason and treachery and executed. And Madoc, knowing his family, knowing his father, that his father is a very honorable person, knows that there's no way that his father actually did it. There's no way his mother did the things that she's accused of. So he knows that they've been wronged somehow, and he's desperate to avenge them. But he learns that there is a secret daughter of this king who he believes is behind all of the treachery that led his parents to be killed. This daughter supposedly lured his parents into that situation, and they would never have been executed if they'd never been brought into the area by this woman. So he concocts this revenge plot that he's going to kill this woman to get revenge against her father. And so it is a enemies to lovers romance, which is something that I love. That's one of my favorite tropes. It's just amazing. I'm here to gush about it, but I'm almost like struggling to find the words because of how great it was. It was pretty high on the angst. At least this is the kind of angst that I like. I love when characters misunderstand each other in a context where it makes sense. Not where it's just like being petty and juvenile, but like in this world where they have these specific roles and it all like is logically sound. Like, that's what I love. And just the feeling of being wronged and the struggle of like loving someone that's determined to misunderstand you. That's just so good to me. Mostly what seals the deal for me with this book is the heroine, who is called Vane. She is a great character. She's whip smart. She is so clever. And she was born to play the Game of Thrones. Even though she was hidden away as the secret daughter, she very much understands how the world works. She's not naive. She's not like, someone who just gets jerked around and has no idea what's going on. She is like playing chess and is just super analytical. And it's so interesting to read from her perspective and see her logic things out, especially as she comes into contact with Madoc and his warrior tribe and is trying to learn their culture. It's sort of like an anthropological study of this world, like reading from her perspective as she's learning about them, him learning about her culture and her perspectives, and just exploring the world together. It's so interesting because it's so much more than a romance, which the romance to me was top tier. It was everything, checks off everything that I'm looking for, but it's such a fully fleshed out world with excellent world building, beautifully developed characters, and I love the mythology of the world. It is in a polytheistic world, so there's multiple gods, and just seeing how like their personalities, and there's just Vane weaves in these creation stories that tell us about how the world was created and how the gods interacted with each other, which I really appreciate as, someone who loves folklore and mythology. It just made it all seem so much more real, and it was just fantastic. I loved it so much. I recommend it to anybody. Even if you aren't high on the angst like me and you don't like to see people in like emotional turmoil with their romantic lead or whatever, it's just so heartfelt and loving and sincere. I think you would enjoy it anyway. You should at least try it out. I recommend it to everybody because it's got action, political intrigue, romance, drama, fantasy. I don't know. I think it's got a little bit for everybody. So this is my first 5-star read of the year, which it's only January, but I'm just really excited, really glad that I read it, and excited to continue on with the series because I know There is a second book already out. I think the third is on the way. And I'm just really, really excited to see what happens next in this world. So that concludes my January reading wrap up. I think I read a total of 8 books in January, which is not bad, not too shabby. I'd love to hear any thoughts that you have about these books that I mentioned, or if you want to share what you've been reading lately. I always love to hear from you in the comments. Also, like I did last time, let's play the emoji game again. Drop a few emojis of the book that sounds the most interesting to you that I mentioned, and we can play that guessing game with each other, and I'll leave mine in the comments, though it's probably obvious already. I don't know. We'll see. As always, thanks for watching. Bye!